We can solve many of the drug addiction problems in the United States, and we don't even need to make them illegal to do it, and it's not even all that difficult. In fact, making them illegal actually gets in the way. I've made it clear in previous videos that I'm generally opposed to prohibition, but I never really got around to fully explaining why I'm opposed to it. So I figure it's time to make one about drugs, since so far I've mainly talked about guns. It's been established by countless other sources that drugs shouldn't be illegal for a variety of practical reasons, financial costs, and effectiveness of laws, etc. And I wouldn't be doing anything new if I simply stated that they should be legalized or cited the practical effects, since at this point they're only denied by those who either haven't looked at the evidence or have chosen to ignore it. So instead, this video will be to explain why drugs should be legal, even the very dangerous ones such as crystal meth. First, I have better ways to prevent their use than making them illegal, better in terms of more effective and in terms of financially better, and keeping them legal is part of that. If you are someone who's in favor of drug prohibition, and your goal is to actually stop drug use and not to make money for the private prison system, then I have a question for you. Barring making something illegal, have you ever considered alternate means of persuasion, or perhaps decided to ask why people turn to drug use in the first place? I'd like to tell you about a phenomenon that I've named the Santa Claus. Now, if we're using America as a template country, and teenagers and young adults getting hooked on more dangerous drugs as our specific topic of concern, which is often the case in the drug prohibition arguments here, I've made a few observations. The first comes from back when I was a teenager. Despite presence in both the public and private educational systems, I was at no point given any information on drugs, other than drugs are bad and get you addicted. Virtually any information beyond that point was restricted, and it was stigmatized to even have an interest in it, much less be well informed on the effects of individual drugs. I speculate that to an extent this was deliberate, as giving someone knowledge on those drugs might make someone, for example, learn that marijuana is less harmful than alcohol, and if they learned marijuana was illegal despite being less harmful than alcohol, they might lose faith in drug prohibition, lose faith in the rules, and as such be less likely to follow them. I'm concerned that some impose the just say no motto for this purpose of maintaining order. However, I think this method is used largely as a result of our educational system not having the time or resources to educate people properly. It's also a method that's highly ineffective based on how many people do drugs anyway. But why, some may ask? Why do the teenagers get tempted to do dangerous drugs? Well, it's because of the Santa Claus. When a child is young and very gullible, they believe Santa will reward them if they've been good, but eventually they grow out of it. Eventually, being told Santa is real isn't enough evidence for his existence anymore, or they stumble upon information that indicates Santa isn't real, such as catching a parent wrapping presents. Much the same, when children start growing up and enter their teenage years, our culture has a tendency to use the same disciplinary tactics used on the child when they were 4 years old, when they're now 14. Throughout my own entire school career, the Just Say No slogan being shouted at me was the extent of my formal education on the subject, and I feel the slogan of Just Say No really explains my problem with the system in a nutshell. Saying no to something just because some authority figure told you to say no. And to anyone who's got any common sense and hasn't quite had their critical thinking skills drilled out of them yet, that answer is not sufficient, nor should it be. Many people are driven to drugs because it's an escape from depressing situations or has some other quantifiable benefit such as relaxation, and I could make an entirely separate video on that topic alone. But for the template argument commonly used in America, teens and young adults being tempted by dangerous drugs, I refer you to the Santa Claus. Like how being told Santa exists stops being sufficient reason to believe in Santa, being told just say no in a similarly authoritative manner stops losing its effect. Just say no is a slogan that would work quite well if it were being used on toddlers and not teenagers. Being told not to do drugs isn't sufficient evidence anymore, especially if one's trust in the authority figures issuing that command has been damaged. By the time I had entered high school, I already had most of my trust in the authority systems absolutely shattered, among numerous false accusations that I was presumed guilty of and penalized for by virtue of me being one of the larger and stronger kids, the testimony of only my accuser, and later on being given the impression that because I was both white and male, that automatically made me guilty. There were many other disturbing independent incidents. I remember one time when I had to watch a video about bullying in which the best defense against a bully was to pretend to be mentally retarded so the bully would be frustrated and walk away. Just recently, I saw a commercial on CBS over a video I was streaming that basically told children that if a bully is beating the shit out of you, all you have to do is say stop and he'll just walk away. If you've ever actually had someone take a swing at you, it's incredibly obvious that you shouldn't follow that advice, and yet falsehoods are still preached to hold up a non-retaliation doctrine which is still commonplace. And it astounds me that it somehow confuses many parents and teachers when the children no longer trust authority after being continuously lied to. I myself was not in any position to treat the warnings about drugs as legitimate, after being falsely accused on many an occasion, deliberately deceived to encourage nonviolence and non-retaliation, among several other issues. How could one have expected me to not turn to drug use? As it turns out, I myself didn't turn to drug use, but that was because I had taken it upon myself to do external research, albeit for different reasons, and I had outside responsibilities when I was in high school, and the way I saw it was I couldn't roll the dice on not being lucid. I imagine, based on how often I had the untrustworthy nature of authority shoved in my face, that a similar degree of mistrust afflicts many teenagers in the United States. And even if that hypothesis was incorrect, it's still too inefficient to lash people to a failed system and invest time and effort into deceiving them into thinking it works in some shallow attempt to preserve order. So consider for a moment how commonplace it might be that some of these teens ask those around them for advice in regards to drugs and are given the same insufficient answer over and over again. Would that not wear on your ability to interpret such warnings as legitimate? It seems that though we teach our children the story of the boy who cried wolf, it's a lesson not always known by the teacher. I think that when we're specifically talking about people who aren't looking for a drug for relaxation or some other direct benefit, and we're talking about people who figured they'd try a dangerous one like meth, they don't heed the warnings because they don't consider those warnings credible, and indeed, why should they? Furthermore, instead of someone recognizing they've made a mistake and being able to ask for medical treatment in the United States, doing so will get you thrown in prison, thus making the addiction continue and worsen due to the inability to obtain treatment and the risk of being incarcerated if you did seek medical attention. I want to run this by you one more time. In the United States, we deceive children about the harmful effects of marijuana, claiming it's worse than alcohol or cigarettes, and when it's discovered that we've lied repeatedly, we then expect that we will be believed on other drugs that we were actually telling the truth about. Furthermore, when people don't trust the boy who cried wolf, we say it's their fault for not being gullible enough to trust someone who's lied to them repeatedly. And despite the fact that it costs us much less money to treat them than to incarcerate them, we incarcerate them anyway, spending more money because we were too lazy to spend money on educating them to stop this problem from happening in the first place. I propose we correct this situation and take the following actions. We legalize all drugs, even the dangerous ones, and instead of spending money on prohibition and on jailing these people, we tax drugs, lowering our number of incarcerations, drug addictions, lowering violent crime and murder rate by destroying the black markets, and we spend the money we saved on all these expenses, as well as spend some of our additional legal drug tax revenue, on reforming our broken educational system. We include basic medical classes throughout a child's educational career, and during those, we educate people as to what these drugs are, and what exactly they do to your body and how they do it. Rather than screaming at them, just say no. That way they can not be told that dangerous drugs are bad, but understand that dangerous drugs are bad. And when someone does make a mistake, which will already be happening much less frequently, we treat them since it's cheaper anyway. We exterminate dangerous drug use with education. Everything I've told you, all the practical effects, have been tested and proven countless times, and there are plenty of other YouTube videos and articles out there that will show you study after study, and comparison after comparison to prove it to you. All you have to do is want to know the facts. But too many people are unwilling to confront reality. Too many people want to believe marijuana is more harmful than alcohol or cigarettes. True understanding, granted by education, requires the facts to be considered correct, and not someone's dogma to be considered correct. And to many, it's okay to have these problems, as long as their precious worldview can stay the same. As long as Papa Billy doesn't need to let go of Santa Claus, it's okay if little Billy is deprived of an education. It's okay if the private prison systems consume him. So America, when you decide you actually want dangerous drug use to go down, and want violent crime and murder rates to go down, and want the black markets shut down, and want to be financially responsible, and value that more than the preservation of a dogma, give me a call. Until then, like this video, share it, and subscribe. Later, YouTube.